Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Mr. Armstrong, and we're going to swing one of the good ones for you. Beautiful number. I cover the waterfront. I cover the waterfront. I like it. Look at that. Look at that. One.
New Orleans, Louisiana could have been a parasite among cities. All it's ever really done is take America's goods as they come down the Mississippi and exchange them for produce arriving by sea. But New Orleanians decided early on that the people involved in this exchange were going to be given a good time. The wine was imported, but the women and song were local, and in the no doubt deplorable combination of the two, New Orleans discovered its raffish genius for enjoyment, which sooner or later was bound to find its complete human embodiment. And at the turn of the present century, it did. Mrs. Armstrong called her son Louis. That's how he pronounced it, though the habit never really caught on with the rest of us. He was born, he said, on the 4th of July, 1900. And since there's no evidence to the contrary, it's rather unsporting to say that he wasn't. They bulldozed his birthplace away long ago. But before the concrete came, it was called Jane Alley, probably an energy-saving corruption of James Alley. Louis had a ramshackle home life. He hardly ever saw his father, and his mother, May Ann, for all her dignity in the family photograph, may well have been forced into prostitution in the black section of the red light district known to history as Storyville. New Orleans has never been proud of the district. In mid-1984, the single plaque that commemorates the place could be seen reposing among some builder's rubble in the middle of the double carriageway that is Basin Street. The old Basin Street featured a row of opulent bordellos where the piano professors played, with sometimes a cornet or clarinet to carry the tune. But the real musical reputations were made in more public places, street parades, dances, and picnics. The cornets were the natural leaders. Only a cornetist had the chance to be called the king. The first holder of the title was Buddy Bolden, or King Bolden as he came to be called. He never recorded, and information about him is pretty scarce. But the house he occupied at the height of his powers is still perfectly well preserved. This is it, 2309 First Street. Rather more well-to-do than the Armstrong abode. Buddy Bolden was carried away to the State Mental Hospital in 1907, so young Louis scarcely had the chance to hear him. In any case, he was more interested for the time being in singing, with an itinerant quartet of kids who rendered the sentimental favorites of the day.
Our theme song was My Brazilian Beauty down on the Amazon. Oh, you know, Captain put them nickels and quarters in there, you know, go down and Storyville, you know.
Yeah, no.
Yeah. Gamblers and everything.
Roaming the streets, Louis was now getting beyond the control of his mother and grandmother, and one New Year's Eve around 1912, he saved them the trouble by firing off a borrowed pistol and getting arrested. He was sent for correction to the local waifs' home, sternly run by Mr. Joseph Jones, and it was in the Jones home that Louis finally joined a band. He made rapid progress, as any boy would who knows that he's had his life's work thrust into his hands. The teenage Louis was now strong enough to take a job delivering coal, often to the prostitution cubicles or cribs of Storyville.
Well, quite natural. They're standing there with nothing on but shimmies, and we'd call them teddies at the time, you know. So they have be a little boy and you know, put some coal on the grate, you know. Quite natural. Got to take a mug there right quick. If they'd see me, they'd slap me down. Yeah, I used to do that. But I used to hear all that good music, too.
Louis's musical hero was the latest cornet king of New Orleans, Joe Oliver. There may have been no more than 15 years between their ages, but since one party was looking for a father and the other for a son, that's how the relationship worked. Louis never ceased to give thanks for Oliver's tutelage.
He used to tell me all the time, play more lead on that horn. I was just like a clarinet, like the guys run up and down the horn nowadays, the popping and things. I was doing all that, fast fingers and everything. So he used to tell me, play some lead on that horn, boy, you know.
In 1918, Joe Oliver went north to find fame in Chicago. His pupil began to travel too. Louis had landed a job playing on the Mississippi riverboats of the Streckfus line, which in those days would travel to Davenport, Iowa, and even beyond, trips that could last for weeks at a time. Every night, the steam calliope announced a stop, and in the vast and elegantly curved ballroom, the band would play for dances. The band leader was Fate Marable, but the man who taught Louis most was a multi-instrumentalist called David Jones.
David Jones was a phenomenal musician. He played the reeds, he played trumpet, but his instrument really was the mellophone and the French horn. His harmony, I dig him like, now I can appreciate what he was doing. I didn't know what he was doing then. He was running all kinds of, all kinds of strange changes and everything, and I think he had was some help to Louis, because Louis could see from David Jones what could be done with that horn. Because nobody had taken the liberties and variate on a horn other than the clarinet players. But here was David Jones doing these things on a mellophone.
At home in New Orleans, Louis now had a wife, a turbulent prostitute called Daisy Parker, who seems to have spent most of this brief relationship throwing things at Louis. But in 1922, he was saved further bruises by a telegram from his mentor.
As it went on, and King Oliver got set in Chicago at the Lincoln Gardens, he sent for me to play second trumpet with him. And that was my man anyway. I didn't care where, as long as I was with him.
I can't imagine you playing second trumpet to anybody.
Oh, it was great just to sit behind and listen what he played. He used to figure out the duets and things while the band was romping. And Bix and all them boys, Louis Panickel, Paul Whiteman, and all them cats used to come sit down and watch how we did it, but they never could figure out. I was so instilled in Joe there,
Yeah, of course, yeah.
I loved him so much that whatever he played, I always put a second to it.
When little Louis joined Papa Joe in Chicago, King Oliver probably wasn't fully aware that he had imported into his band the one man capable of taking his title away. But for the moment, the king was still the dominant figure.
King Oliver was more of a punch man than Louis. Louis was a little smoother than King Oliver, but King Oliver was I'd say, a more exciting person because of his style, his punch, the way he played his trumpet, But together, they were just unbelievable.
Oliver's Creole jazz band were all New Orleans men, apart from the piano player, Lil Hardin, a college-educated lady from Memphis, Tennessee.
Lil, she was an excellent musician. And she was a disciplinarian also. She taught Louis a whole lot in regards to reading music and so forth.
It was a wonderful band, and even when the rest of the personnel left Oliver, Louis and Lil, who were now a married couple, remained, much to the disgust of the ambitious Lil.
I told him, I said, now, I don't want to be married to a second trumpet player. He says, well, what are you talking about? I said, well, I don't want to be married to a second trumpet player. I want you to play first. He said, well, I can't play first. Joe's playing first. I said, well, that's why you got to quit. He said, I can't quit Mr. Joe. Mr. Joe sent for me, and I can't quit him. I said, well, it's Mr. Joe or me.
When Lil's campaign succeeded in detaching Armstrong from Oliver, Louis was left with no obvious musical home in Chicago. But a New York band leader, Fletcher Henderson, remembered the young man from an earlier trip to New Orleans and took him on. In less than a year, Louis's hot solos changed the Henderson band from a jerky, novelty sort of outfit to a worthy prototype for the swing band era. But all in all, it was a job that brought Henderson and his men more advancement than Louis. Soon he was back in Chicago, in his wife's band. Not a comfortable position for a husband to occupy in the 1920s.
It was very bad because they started kidding him. about me being lead of the band. Look out there, your wife will fire you. And the other musicians call him Henpeck, and they call him Henny for shit. Hey there, Henny! And it made Louis angry, and it embarrassed him, and he became so hard to get along with at home and on the bandstand. I would get ready to start the band off, and he'd have all the musicians on one side telling them a damn joke. And I got after him about it, and he said, well, if you don't like it, fire me.
When the arrangement came to an end, Louis shared himself out among other employers, playing floor shows and theatres and musical interludes at picture houses like the Vendome, where he was featured with Erskine Tate's band. Whenever he missed a show, it was hard on deputies like Doc Cheetham, who had to play Armstrong's showpiece, Poor Little Rich Girl.
He had a big band. He had... And it went down, and then I stood up, the spotlight right on me. The house was like this. And you could hear the people screaming when I stood up. They screamed to the top of their voice. Whistle and scream. You couldn't hear the band, anything for the scream. And then it just went right down to where you could hear a pin fall while I was playing. That hurt me more than anything in my life. I had never got over that because they knew that wasn't living.
Armstrong's first Hot Five with Lil on piano existed only in the recording studio, but the records were enough to revolutionize musicians' thinking in Chicago and beyond.
Yeah, I got the heebs, I got the jeeps talking about. Then Connie chop suey. See, the Oak Air people released a record on Louis about every 6 weeks, and everybody waited for the records, because each one of his records was a lesson in something new, things to come.
A high C in those days was, we called that a high note. See? He played maybe 30 or 50 high notes, high C's on this one tune they were playing. And the next day, everybody in the street was talking about it. Everybody in the street. They all went over there to Sunset to hear Louis do it. He didn't do it again. I guess he could have, but he didn't.
Louis was now changing to trumpet because it looked more showy. From time to time, he would try a new model or a new mouthpiece, and all the trumpeters would change along with him.
A fellow named Rudy Monk, who was making a mouthpiece, very cushion rim, with the edge is like a razor, the edge that grips the lip. That enabled you to place it at the same place all the time, because it would cut, it would make a groove in there, and every time you put the mouthpiece up there, that thing would fit right in there. That's what bothered him. That was the beginning of his lip trouble.
One way of resting his lip was to sing, which Louis did a great deal on his Hot Five records. But it proved impossible to state on the label whether he was tenor, baritone, or bass.
Louis broke all this business now, so that's where the song stylists came in. People begin to buy records because they liked a certain personality. You could have a grasping whiskey voice, or a high soprano voice, or a monkey shine voice, or anything. People like you, they bought your records. Louis Armstrong is responsible for that. He's the first person to scat sing on a record in heebie-jeebies. I've got the heebie-jeebies, scoop, scott, scoop, bop, doop, bop, doop, keep, scop. Never heard nothing like that. Scat singing, they call it. He introduced that.
More refined electrical recording processes arrived just in time to catch Armstrong's second Hot Five, featuring on piano Earl Hines, the only available instrumentalist whose sense of time was equal to Armstrong's. They recorded one amazing duet together, a King Oliver tune called Weatherbird. Musically, Armstrong was living in the future. Domestically, when he was at home, he was living in the past. The breakup of his marriage to Lil had already been accurately predicted in 1927 on the records they'd made together. But it wasn't only from Lil that Louis was gradually parting. He was also ceasing to be merely a jazz instrumentalist and joining the mainstream of show business. In 1929, he left Chicago and journeyed by car to New York with Carol Dickerson's band. And while playing club dates with them, he doubled with another band in the Broadway revue, Hot Chocolates. The numbers that he recorded show him using a simpler, broader, more declamatory style, as though he were deliberately trying not to baffle his audience.
See, Louis changed a lot. He slowed down a lot, his technique. But I think that's with the times. Because, you know, he was playing like chop suey and all those things. But I think he slowed down to play more beautiful and beautify his solos. That's natural. That's just progress.
There was no future for the Carol Dickerson band, which broke up in New York when Louis abandoned it. It wasn't his fault. His fate was in the hands of agents who had no time to be considerate. This was 1929. There were gangsters to be appeased, and they weren't kidding.
And I know one instance where in the Loop in Chicago, there was a fight for a singer's contract. And this man was warned not to sing at the opposite supper club. And he sang against their orders and things like that. And they actually paralyzed him so that he couldn't sing anymore for anybody else at all, which was an extreme case, but it actually happened. When they told you not to do anything, that's what they meant. Absolutely.
Several syndicates of mobsters already felt they had first call on Armstrong's services. He began to dodge from city to city, seldom making an unforced move. In 1930, he escaped to California, taking a job at the Cotton Club in Culver City. Armstrong's current manager was a plump, rowdy, hard-drinking individual called Johnny Collins. With his hats and cigars, Pop Collins looked the part, but he was really no better at placating gangsters than anyone else. Eventually, there was no place left to escape to within the United States. Quite suddenly, Louis Armstrong was billed to appear in London. The first difference England made to his life was that it took away his old nickname, Satchel Mouth, and substituted a music hall minstrel abbreviation which Louis found oddly appealing.
When we landed at Plymouth, and Percy Brooke come up, he shook my hand and said, "Hello, Satchmo." Yeah. See what I mean? So I asked the trumpet player, Charlie, who played the trumpet with me from Paris in the band, who's going to join us. Yeah. I said, this cat called me Satchmo, and my name is Satchel Mouth. He said, the man thinks you have mole mouth. That's the way it is.
So Satchmo, a name more useful to showbiz than to Louis's close friends, went on at the Palladium, facing an audience composed half of people who had no idea what he was doing, and half of Hot 5 record fanatics longing for the Armstrong of 1928.
Or, to my mind, out of his senses, see, so that I was an uneasy audience. I mean, I felt uneasy about somebody who I thought of as great.
His trumpet playing was under scrutiny. The fact that his famous record that came out, Memories of You, I think it's called, he finished on a top F. I think it was the first recorded event of that note for a trumpet player. And of course, it came to England, and people came to hear this trumpet player. So he wanted to show them that he was really a trumpet player.
In spite of that, working conditions were a lot smoother for Louis in Europe than at home. After a few unsettled months back in the States, he returned to London, always in the company of his steady girlfriend, Alpha Smith. He made continental tours to Scandinavia and later to Western Europe, where the Jamaican-born trumpeter Leslie Thompson was in the band.
We usually played the introductions, which was always a sleepy time down south, and the curtain would gradually open with the band playing, and then big claps. The next minute, Louis would appear and rush onto the stage right in the center and bounce his head like that. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Dinah, look out there, boy. Are you ready? Look out.
state of Carolina. If there is, let me know. Show to me, Dinah, the Dixon blazing, who love the city gazing to the eyes of Dinah me. Baby, every night, one eye, shake with fight on, cause my dynamite, change your mind, Baba did this, don't you want to China, baby? I'm having a line, oh, baby. Oh, Dinah, Dinah, oh, Dinah, oh, baby, Dinah me. Dinah, 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 oh, baby, every night, well, oh, yes, man. So that you want to do that, baby. I'd have an old line, yeah.
It's an extraordinary stage demeanour built on a kind of aggressive shyness. It's full of signs of what from anyone else would look like embarrassment. He gradually toned down this effect, but not till the end of his life did he really lose it.
When he went back to America, he never felt the same again as when he left America in July 1932 to come over to England. He had a new sense of his own importance as an artist.
He also had a new sense of freedom, since the manager, Pop Collins, had successfully been ditched, and a certain amount of rest had been arranged for Armstrong's battered lip. Back in America, he put his affairs in the hands of a new manager, Joe Glazer. The band Glazer sent Louis into battle with was one of the better ones, an expanded version of the Louis Russell Band, whom he'd partnered before. Greeley Walton was on tenor sax.
Thanks, Greeley. The band would still have to do their part when he would go and rest. So we still kept our same beat and personality. The guys could play very well. Red Allen was a beautiful trumpet player. He used to play his things when Louis would go and rest. And the band went on just the same. And of course, they had Higginbotham there, and they had Albert Nicholas, and those guys could play. So, and Charlie Holmes. So it went right on. The rhythm was Paul Barberin, Pop Foster, and it was Bill Johnson on the guitar, and Russell on piano, of course.
On the band's tours, Savannah, Georgia was a frequent stopping place, and it was there in August 1937 that Armstrong ran into King Oliver again. The king was down and out, selling vegetables in the street, and Louis, according to a local newspaper report of their meeting, gave him a $100 bill. Good publicity, but too late for Oliver, who died in Savannah the following August and was buried in the Bronx.
He wound up a very pathetic man. First place was too far away from home, you know. I imagine if I get in a shape like that, I'd go back to New Orleans. But he got stranded in Savannah, and that's where he stayed. The one that enjoyed his days and music, they did the best they could, but generations, you got to watch them generations, they grew up so fast. That's why an old timer told me, always stay before the public.
It was years and years before Joe Glazer could realize I could play with white boys. I didn't know. And playing for white people.
Yes.
And you've always had...
When I first started with him, he just booked me in colored dances.
Yeah.
And they'd have more white people than he colored people.
Yeah.
See what I mean? And it still goes like that all through the South.
With a new big band under the musical direction of Joe Garland, Louis's life was ruled by Joe's, he took to the road again. And so on it went into the war years, the only real interruptions coming in Louis's private life. In 1938, he'd made the mistake of marrying Alpha Smith, after which the end wasn't long in coming.
She was a very barrel-house, joyous dame, and they were great fun together. They were a very, very devoted couple, but she finally broke his heart. She ran off with a white drummer, and Louis was terribly upset about it, but he said he's a good drummer.
A dancer called Lucille Wilson became wife number 4 in 1942. Louis's other marriage to the big band was in a bit of a rut. Jazz was in a phase of looking back to its small group origins, but Louis had only been marginally involved in this, until 1947, when the promoter Ernie Anderson went looking for Joe Glazer with a $1,000 check in his hand.
When we got in his office, I said, "You are selling Louis Armstrong for $650 a night with a 16-piece band." "Oh," he said, "that's nonsense." Well, of course, I knew it was true, and he did too. I said, "That $1,000 is for Louis Armstrong for one night without the band." It was a terrible strain, but he couldn't give the check up. And he knew it must be all right with Louis because he knew I was a friend of Louis. So he finally, very reluctantly, agreed. Then I went out and got Jack Teagarden for $75. I got Sidney Catlett and Peanuts Huckle, Bob Haggart, and George Wetling. And I gave everybody $50. Scale was $18. And I handed Louis this list we had made up of the numbers. He said, "That's a great list." And that list is exactly what was played, starting with Cornet Chop Suey, which he hadn't played in maybe 25 years.
The Town Hall concert not only provided a magnificent set of recordings from a fully recharged Armstrong, it also forced a change of style.
When I got the call, then I knew that was the end of the big band. They said, "Well, Louis wants you to join in. We're going to have a small band. We're going to see if it works while Louis is doing the picture." So opening night, it was a sensation. It was just a sensation, because that's what people had been waiting for, the Armstrong to get back to his roots.
The Armstrong All-Stars had Teagarden on trombone, Barney Bigard from New Orleans on clarinet, Earl Hines resurfacing on piano, so there was plenty of solo talent. But small group work is hard work, and Louis, by any calculation, was nearly 50. He had to take care of himself.
He had a ritual. He had a little case full of vitamin pills. You know, he had, in the little vials, he had red ones, green ones, blue ones, purple ones, you know. And so one was for eating with your salad, one was for meat, one was for vegetables, one was for dessert.
There was a new generation of black Americans coming up who were less than pleased by Armstrong's willingness to resemble an old-time minstrel. But Louis, in that sense, was not a modern thinker, nor did he have much time for the bebop music that was the modernists' rallying point. One of the personal highlights of Armstrong's now perpetual tour of duty was the All-Stars trip to Nkrumah's Ghana in 1956. Among the vast crowds of welcome, he saw a woman who so closely resembled his mother that he became convinced that his family roots were here in what used to be the Gold Coast. In Accra, he played for 100,000 people, whom the police had to keep back by flicking at them with the soft leather loops on their truncheons. It was Louis who got hold of the wrong end of the stick.
He said he'd seen audiences being truncheoned in the Deep South, and he never expected to see this to his audience in Africa. And he stopped playing, and he came and appealed to me with tears in his eyes. He said, "For goodness sake, stop them truncheoning my audience." Well, the police had to come and explain that it was they were either going to crush themselves to death or be urged back. So he started to play again, but then ultimately he had to give up. He couldn't play under those conditions. But he'd played for about an hour by that time. But I've never seen a man so upset. He couldn't speak for an hour after that. He was a very emotional man when it came to that sort of thing.
I think that he was comfortable in a lot of ways with his blackness. He was a success, and he could afford to be just the way he wanted to be. And he could afford to be Uncle Tommy's. A lot of people considered he could afford to make the black jokes, sort of Tommy's jokes. And I've talked to a lot of the older guys that knew him way back when. So he was just always that way. And yeah, he was sort of a Tom, but lovable and honest. And he didn't have to kid around. He could make, his handkerchief head jokes or whatever, and he was comfy with that.
The tours resumed, some of them sponsored now by the State Department, which gave Louis the honorary title of Ambassador Satch. In 1959, the traveling embassy got as far as Spoleto in Italy, and there it very nearly stopped. Louis had a heart attack, one of the best camouflaged heart attacks in show business history.
All the time, I said that Louis did not have a heart attack. Louis had a respiratory condition, pneumonia. I brought this man up from Rome to agree with my diagnosis so that Louis's career would not be ended.
In what friends regarded as a suicidally short time, Armstrong was back at work. The call of his art was too strong, you might say, though Louis didn't quite take that view of it.
The only time I ever heard him refer to his music and his art, which is great in my estimation. And we're still talking about him years after he died. Books, records, all his records were in print. And one of the guys in the band got drunk or something, screwed up. And he looks at the guy and he says, "Dove, with my hustle." He refers to his whole thing as my hustle, like a street gambler or something, which I thought was kind of nice.
Joe Muraney joined the All-Stars in the middle 60s.
While I was on the road with him through the years, he every once in a while would send me a letter. I would get a letter at home. And there's one which just made me cry, He told me, how much he dug me as a clarinet player and as a man and stuff, and it was like a testimonial. I've only shown it to my children. It's kind of an odd little document. But he was encouraging, yes.
Commercially, the 60s were a high point for Louis and a time of deep satisfaction for Joe Glazer.
We were in the same building, 445 Park Avenue, and I would say, "Joe, Louis making a lot of junk. Why don't you bring him back?" He says, "Find a hit song, and you can have him back again."
When the hit that Glazer had been hunting arrived, nobody in the All-Stars noticed at first, least of all the leader.
We flew into New York, and then they gave Louis the music and Billy Cowell ran it down on the piano, so Louis got kind of irritated. He said, "You mean you called me on my only day off to record this? This is terrible, So we recorded it, and went back to that job. And about 3 or 4 months later, we were out in the Midwest or Iowa or Nebraska doing one-nighters, So we kept hearing the audience holler, "Hello, Dolly, hello, Dolly." So the first couple of nights, Louis he didn't pay it into mind. So then it kept getting loud, "Hello, Dolly." So Louis turned to Bill and said, "What is that, hello, Dolly? What are they talking about?" Bill said, "You remember that record day we did about 4 months ago? That was one of the tunes that we recorded. It's from a Broadway show that just opened, So then we had to call to New York to get the music, and then we had to learn it. And when we learned it, the first time we put it on in the concert, pandemonium broke out. Because people waited for it. And that was his biggest commercial hit of his life, commercial-wise. Made millions.
A worldwide hit made Louis Armstrong yet more saleable and tourable. It was the last time we in Britain saw him at something like full power. Returned to the quiet road in unluxurious Corona, New York, where he and Lucille had settled.
He built himself a nice home in Corona, or rebuilt a house, and fixed up the grounds, probably brought extra property. He lived well. He lived the way he wanted to live. He had his limo and chauffeur, and he had a lovely wife, and they had a lot of friends.
If their windows were open and he was practicing, you could hear it, and you would... it caused people to stop because they realized that this was Louis Armstrong's home, and then they were thrilled to think that maybe they were hearing him. When they first came, we had quite a few children, and he associated himself very well with the children. He was never too busy, and he took them on trips. He was with them. He had parties for them when he was home and when he was available. And Mrs. Armstrong the same way.
I happened to be with him in a big benefit out in Long Island just before he was hospitalized. And he couldn't play his trumpet. He sang, see. And know he was doing a piece, I think he was doing Mac the Knife. And he started singing, and he started pivoting on one note, you know, catching his breath. And just the idea of him catching his breath, he was swinging.
Joe Moraney recorded one of these very last performances.
He plays Indiana, and he's got no chops at all. He's physically in terrible shape. And the old man, I cried when I heard it, and I a couple of times, and I couldn't play it anymore. He plays Indiana with all the mistakes, and he tries to make something happen with the mistakes. And it's, you know, he wouldn't give up.
Louis made it home again to celebrate what by common consent was his 71st birthday on the 4th of July, 1971. On the morning of the 6th, Doc Schiff received his last call.
And when we got there was Louis in bed with a smile on his face. And naturally, I examined him. I had no heartbeat, no blood pressure, no nothing. Dr. Zucker examined him and confirmed the findings. So we just took and covered his face with his blanket. It took an awful lot out of me because he was like a brother. He wouldn't go anywhere without me. He wouldn't do anything without me. We were so close that people couldn't realize why I stayed with him. It wasn't the money. It was the love for the man. His kindness, his goodness, his charitableness, and of course, his artistry. It was really something to have known him.
Louis Armstrong was buried in the Flushing Cemetery, Brooklyn. The trumpet attached to the top of his gravestone was stolen. Fortunately, you can't steal genius. You can only try to describe it.
I'll tell you something Louis could do that I never saw another trumpet player do. Louis could play with dancers and people right out in front of him, and they would never put their hands up and hide up to their ears and close their ears or make any grimacing and any faces or anything, you know, like to hide from his playing. Because it was so pleasing and his tone was so nice. It wasn't harsh at all.
You didn't have to worry about him making a fumble or missing a note or nothing like that, you know. He get up there to reach something, you know, that was it. He hit it.
I've seen people give me a Mickey Mouse smile. Look at it. 3-cent smile. Quarter smile. Give me a shilling smile. What's that other big denomination over there? A pound?
Yeah.
Louis Armstrong give you a 10-pound smile.
So in a way, you keep Louis always with you?
Always with me all the time, because whenever I play a solo, this seems to say something to me all the time, all of my way. That's the greatest man that ever lived.
In 1994, nearly a quarter of a century after his death, Louis did it again. A boxed set of his early recordings from the 20s and 30s made it to the top of every jazz critic's list of the best albums of the year. It was even nominated for a Grammy. As the song says, Louis, it's so nice to have you back where you belong.
With my fancy. How do evangelists sway so many people with their words? Bill Curtis explores the Jim and Tammy Faye Baker case tomorrow on American Justice. Now Cracker helps jog the memory of a suspect with amnesia. Robbie Coltrane stars in the A&E mystery movie next on A&E. It's time well spent.
Lend me your chops for just a moment, and my imagination will make that moment live. Yeah. Give me what you alone can give. I can't stop in that dream.